right, welcome back to another episode of Mental Health Monday. And my boy Will, what up, boy?
What's going on, bro?
Chilling, man. Welcome. Finally here for the pull-up.
Yes, sir. It's been a long time coming.
Hey, you like the camera setup, man?
Love it.
Fancy. I be
Love
fancy,
it.
man.
This
You
is
know,
nice.
You got the wall, got the art, man. You got that jackass. You got the museum on, man. You in your bag. All right, man. So let the folks know who you are and where you from.
Yep. My name is William Lyles the III. I am originally from Nashville, Tennessee.
He's the third.
Yeah, my dad is junior and my grandfather is senior, of course. But from Nashville, Tennessee. Lived in Atlanta, Georgia for about 11 years, almost 12 years.
John Peach.
Before moving to D.C. Back in 2016. So I've been here for almost 7 years now. And
would you say that you are D.C. chilling?
I am D.C. chilling.
Okay.
Right. So it's been great here. I am in education. I'm a school leader. I've been doing this work for a little over almost 14 years now. So, wow, seems like yesterday that I started in education. But
do 14 years fly by in education?
Oh my gosh, they go by just like that, bro. But I got into education through Teach for America. So I did my 2-year commitment in Atlanta. At Tri-Cities High School as a special education teacher. So shout out to Tri-Cities, East Point, Georgia, all of my brothers and sisters down there. And I've been doing the work ever since. So, yeah.
Okay, so what got you into education?
You know what? I come from a rich background of educators. So my grandparents, both my grandfather and my grandmother were in education. My grandfather was an adult education professor and did a lot of work in the small town that he was from. My grandmother was an elementary teacher for a number of years. My mother was a preschool teacher. I did a lot of work with helping her with her lesson plans as a kid, and I remember her always asking me to do like the arts and crafts activities for her kids, which I hated doing. But just didn't know that was like preparation for the work that I'm doing now. My oldest sister is an assistant principal, and my middle sister is in the medical field, but she started out as an educator. So like come from a very rich background of like educators and servant leaders. So it's always been in the blood. But I think having the opportunity to join Teach for America and really just work with kids that look like me, that have some of the same hopes, dreams, fears as I had, and just providing them with the tools to overcome that is like what really has invested me in the work over these years. And then being able to see sorry about that. That's my,
No, you good, man. You jazzy, man. That's cool.
That's my alarm for work.
You in the groove. It's fine. I'm not judging.
So yeah, I mean, I think that has been what has kept me doing this work and continues to keep me doing this work, to be able to see the success stories of the kids and the students that I've been able to touch over the years.
Okay, so Nashville to Georgia to DC.
Yeah.
Comparatively speaking, what are your opinions on the education system on this side?
Wow.
Take your time.
That's a very deep question.
Take your time.
I think we all know historically that like education has not necessarily been kind to the Black community. And I think that's something that I've seen from my educational experience, both as a student and as a professional in Nashville, in Atlanta, and even here in DC. And so, I think comparatively, one of the stark differences between the South and like borderline the North, because I know we're still under the Mason-Dixon line, is the innovation around like reinventing and redefining what education looks like for Black and brown kids and just this generation of kids. I think, and it may just be where I was in my professional walk in education, but I just remember in the South, like it was about doing a job, right? Can you pull in a crowd? Can you basically teach? Are you educated? Do you sound educated? Okay, we're gonna put you in a classroom. And you Black. So hey, this must be for you. But I think DC has really elevated my perspective and how I look at education. I've always been in urban settings, but I think DC is unique in that like there's intentionality around understanding the community in which you serve what has been their experience, what is their current experience, and how do we align that with what they're learning in the classroom. And I think being in DC is unique within itself because a lot of things politically are happening here. A lot of things socially kind of start here and kind of branch out to other places. So it's important to like tap into that and use that to build an experience for kids where they see themselves. And they feel like they can actually be a part of the history and the education that they're learning in class, and that will eventually be, taught in classes in years to come. So I don't know if that answers that question.
No, I think that was a good start. It was a good start to the question. So even with the progress that you see DC brings to the table, there's still more that can be accomplished.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
You want to speak on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think over the last couple of years, DC and the DMV has done a really good job of has tapped into this idea of what's the difference between equity and equality, right? We see disparities, we see shortages in different communities, and we're like, okay, hey, maybe we just need to give everybody an equal share. But I think the reality and the beautiful thing about communities is depending on where you are, you need certain things. And that may look different in one community versus another. And I think really understanding communities and listening, keeping your ear down to the ground for what the people are asking for. And sometimes this is, explicit and sometimes it's implicit. And you have to be listening to hear what it is that the people are actually saying to identify what they need. And so I think the direction based on what I have experienced and what I'm seeing in our communities is we for a very long time have I guess compromised our own mental health in order to survive, right? Overlooked our needs in order just to do what people are telling us to do. I have to go to school because my parents went to school and people are telling me I have to go to school. I don't like this class or I don't like this subject, but I got to be here because there's no other option. And I think, going back to this idea of redefining education and what it means to be educated in a public setting is what is it that students need? What are they asking for? And how do we include that in their experience? And so when I talk about mental health from an educational perspective, it really goes back to what is your experience and what are your interests based on your experience, right? So if you like sports, it's not just about playing sports. How can I teach you a sport, or how can you learn more about a sport, not just from the athletic perspective, but from a business perspective? How can you learn that now to address some type of disparity within your community, right? Whether it's helping a group of kids that are interested in sports in elementary school and you're a middle school student, how can you help that next generation to be more successful when they get to where you are, right? Whether your love is cooking, how do we provide a space for you to learn how to cook, right? And learn those skills so that you can help those furthest from opportunity in the community who are maybe homeless or whatever the case may be. How do we provide kids with the tools to be able to experience some of the things that they're interested in addition to learning a curriculum, or learning how to write, learning how to read, learning how to do arithmetic? It's more than that. And our kids are more than that. And if we provide them the opportunity and the space to do that now, then as they get older, it's not a matter of can I do this or will I be able to do this? It's no, how am I going to create this? Because I've already been doing this for years. And at this point, it's about as an adult, how do I make money off of this and make room for myself, for my people and for generations to come? And that takes money, right? Providing those opportunities in a public school setting takes money, and it takes connecting with the right people in the community that can provide that experience for kids. And I think that's the next step for the public school system is how do we peep kids' interests? How do we find the programs and the organizations that can cultivate or foster this interest? And then how do we give, kids the tool set to be able to use that skill to address something in their community now? not when they become an adult, but like right now in this very moment.
So what steps do you see schools taking to get closer to this mindset, or are they taking the steps?
Well, I think what the pandemic has taught us as educators is that like there's no way that you can close academic gaps if like you don't tap into the mental intelligence or social emotional intelligence that kids have or lack, right? Like I think we've always known in urban communities that like our kids come with a set of experiences or what we call ACEs.
Tell me about ACEs.
So these are experiences that students have had, that they're traumatic experiences that impact how students show up every day. And so like we have learned that like these experiences have kept them from being able to access what they're learning in class. And if they're not in a good socio-emotional space, then they're not going to be available for learning.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the first step, acknowledging that. And giving kids the tools to be able to, you know, understand what that means for themselves, so that they can actually move past that. Because there's a lot of hurt. Like even as adults, we have a lot of hurt that we haven't really like actually unpacked. And if that's our story as adults, I can only imagine kids who are holding so many things on themselves that they don't have to be holding on to. And it's just creating a space for them to share that and know that they can move past that, you know, in order to, you know, be successful. And yeah.
What's the role of a teacher versus a parent? From your point of view.
The only difference is the title itself. You know, I think at the end of the day, teachers, you know, parents, they all want the same for kids. They want them to be successful. They want them to be loved. They want them to be prepared. They want them to be challenged. I think everybody wants that. I think based on your experience, determines like your perspective on how you think they should get there.
Yeah.
And I think that's ultimately the difference, is just the position. And I think being able to appreciate both, understand both, is the big piece. And I think the only way in which to reach that point is through relationship. And so it's bigger than like, I think we have to be very intentional as educators to, you know, create a space where we can get to know the families in which we serve outside of the academics. Like academics is important. It will always be important because that's what makes you competitive to other people. But do I know you? Do you actually know who I am? Like, what is your experience? Let me share my experience and like find some commonalities there. Because once you have that foundation of a relationship, like it just makes things much easier to navigate, whether it is a corrective conversation or whether it's a shout out, you know, or showing or celebrating love for a kid. I mean, I think that relationship is really pivotal in terms of bridging the gap between an educator and a parent or guardian.
Okay. So within your experience, now that we know the difference between a teacher and a parent is the title itself, what do you think DC can do in terms of resources, and how would those resources better help you do what you would like to do in the education setting? Very long-winded.
Yo, Juice, you got some deep questions. This is good though.
Take your time. Yeah.
This is good. I think it really is about listening, right? I mean, I think as professionals, it's easy to like read things that or learn about buzzwords in education, and to understand education from a theoretical perspective. But like the practical piece is really important. And so I think in order to tap into that, like you just got to listen to what people are saying, you know? And I think it's easy to like say, this is my agenda as an educator. This is where I need to get your kid, or this is where we're moving in terms of, you know, achievement. But like, the reality is, if it, you know, you might understand that from a theoretical standpoint, but like, it's important to get the people who you're serving to understand that too. And that may look very different. And so I think, like I said, everybody wants the same thing at the end of the day. It's just, how do we get there? And I think a part of that process is listening to the people and asking them what they want and what they need. And the reality is, there's a lot of great things happening in DC. There's a lot of great organizations that are doing great work. And I think creating a platform where, you know, people can, you know, showcase that, because, you know, those programs very well may be what your school or what a community needs in order to thrive and push that initiative forward.
Okay. Now, you've reached out to me before because you said you wanted us to do some mental health and wellness events at your school that you work at. Let's talk about the rules and regulations that DC has and how that gets in the way of furthering the process. Because funds are limited and what you guys can really do is limited.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's also a very good question. I think the biggest limitation is understanding the system.
Yeah.
And I think that goes way beyond DC. I think that's like a national thing. Like, you just got to understand the system. I think things can become very political at times. And I think politics can get in the way of like what needs to happen and what needs to be done for kids and for communities. And so I think it's twofold. I think it's important to have an agenda and have a purpose for what you want to see. But I think understanding and knowing how to navigate the politics of that is also very important.
Yeah.
Because when you have the right people on your side, you can actually do anything. And so I think politics is one of the biggest pieces. And then just being able to have, like, it doesn't have to be on a large scale, but just like having the record to say that, hey, like, I've done this work on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
And it's been successful, and this is how it's been successful, and like getting people to buy into what it is that you're trying to do, I think is also a big piece as well. Because, you know, there's money out there. You know, there's organizations that are doing the work that you want to see happen, but it's all about like how you communicate it. Do you have the record to show that like this is worth me investing in?
All right, so resource-wise, what holds schools back to reaching out to outside groups when it comes to bringing wellness and mental health to the education space?
I think a lot of it's just bureaucracy, like,
But tell me about the value of that bureaucracy. Because, like, we know it's politics, but, like, what walls are you running into as you try to bring more to the kids? Because right now, your job, with what I've seen, you really want to bring more value to that community as much as you can.
Yeah. I think some of it is just branding, and do the powers that be feel like what it is that you're trying to bring aligns with the district's or the school system's vision and mission. I think the other part of that is, again, I mentioned it earlier, but like knowing your community. And so like understanding what it is that the community is asking and wanting. And if it doesn't align with what you see as a need, like educating that community on why a certain resource or program is necessary.
Do you think that's unfair? Because the words you just used are very keen in terms of what they view necessary for the community versus what actually is necessary for the community. Because you guys are on the front line.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do not think it's completely fair, right?
A lot of things are fair.
Yeah, and I think just understanding that and being able to learn how you can like navigate that is half the battle, right? Because I think at the end of the day, if you have the record to show that something is impactful and is necessary, then you can make room for it, regardless of like what the current dynamics are. I think anything is possible. It just takes more work. And it's really a question of like, are you willing to put in that much more work to make sure that this comes, is offered to a community where you see the need, or are you just willing to just keep it moving? And I think the other piece is like the education system as a whole is really focused on quantitative data as it relates to academics, which is important.
So everything is a number.
Yes, everything is a number. And I think the pandemic has really started to push educators to think about qualitative data, like what is the experience? What are the stories between the numbers that we're not telling, that we're not tapping into, that really could be impactful and moving, this work forward? I think that is something that we're just now tapping into and realizing that it's just as important as the quantitative data that we're currently looking at. And I think that is what's going to really get the ball moving around. Like, okay, I see this need based on what I'm hearing, the experiences that the community is having, the experiences that I know these students need and need access to. Like, let's get this ball rolling, in addition to like where we're trying to go in terms of moving or closing the gaps in terms of academics.
Okay. So what gaps exist? Just straight to the cut. Just take your time. I mean, even if you have stories you'd like to share and how that shouldn't exist in today's age, but it does.
I think that for years, we've just been doing education, right? Like you said, everything is a number. If I can move these kids these certain number of points, whether it's making sure that they make a year's worth of growth or that we move them to grade level, performance levels, then I've done my work. But do we know the stories? Like, what happens after that year that you spent with them? Like, what stories do you know about the students and the families that you served? And like, how have you provided them with the skills that they need in order to continue doing what they did with you for years to come? And be self-motivated to do that.
Yeah.
And so, one story that I think about specifically is an 8th grader that I, currently serve, and his family. And I had a very, very direct conversation with him. And, we talk about dropouts. We talk about like retention rates for students, but it's one thing to talk about the numbers and to actually see someone or see a statistic that represents that.
Someone that you've learned to care about.
Yes. And so like this particular student, bright kid, super bright, intelligent. When he came to us, we knew he was intelligent, and that he had a skill set. But he's battling whether he should stay in school or whether there's value to stay in school versus making money, how he knows how to. And like, that's a very hard conversation to have. It's easy to read about it. It's easy to talk about it from a theoretical perspective, but to like live and breathe the same air as someone who's actually experiencing that is a whole different level. And like, I found myself in that conversation, like thinking to myself, like, what can I do to prove to this young brother that like getting your education may not give you the immediate gratification that you need, but like doing what you're doing right now may very well give you what you need in the moment, but is that going to provide you the longitudinal success that you're looking for? And like, how do you convince somebody that's that they need to take a different route? And that's hard. I think our kids, and that's just one example, right? Like, I think there are so many distractions that are happening within our communities.
Give me some examples.
I think kids are, coming from households where they're taking care of their siblings. Parents, for whatever reason, are not able to, take care, of the family, whether it's because of their own mental health challenges or because of, vices that they have, whether it be drugs, whether it be, alcohol. I think there are a number of factors that have played a part into that. So yeah, I think that home dynamic and like what kids are seeing outside of school really plays a big role in that. I think the other piece is because this area is so diverse, there are a lot of experiences and ethnicities that we just don't understand. I think if we don't intentionally try to understand those communities and try to understand those experiences, there's no way we can break those barriers to help them, to give them what they need from an educational perspective.
Can you give me an example of that?
So one of the biggest things for me coming to DC is like, when I think of diversity, I think of black kids. That has always been my experience. It's like diversity is representative of the African American community. But I think what's so rich about this area and the DMV in general is like, it's bigger and broader than that. You're talking about black kids in addition to Hispanic and Latino families. You're talking about, families from West Africa, so it's so, and that's just a few, it's just so broad. The experiences are so broad, and which makes the resources that communities need so much more bigger because you're supporting such a more broad community of people. And I think, when we talk about specifically ELL learners, and these are students who...
I was going to say, got to give a breakdown of that.
Yeah, so when I talk about ELL learners, I'm talking about English language learners, people who are new, students who are new to the country, who are learning the English language for the very first time. And I think a lot of people, are scared to tap into what that looks like from an educational space. Mm-hmm. And we always look at it through the lens of, oh, they just need to learn the English language. That's all they need to do. But it's bigger than that. English acquisition just doesn't come through learning a specific language. It comes through experiences. How do you make connections between the current experience and what you want them to learn? And so I think that that's a lot within itself. And that goes beyond just Hispanic populations. That's like I said, that goes to our African populations, so on and so forth. And I think we've done a lot of great work in that field, but I think we have a long way to go. And I think that's one of the biggest things that are at the front of my mind in terms of tapping into the different, I guess, perspectives in terms of diversity and supporting those different groups. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a lot. It
was layered though, but I mean that's what we here for. You're taking the office work here, and I turn on the camera and I say, "Hey, tell us about what's going on."
Yeah.
Okay. And I mean, we're not here to make a difference. We're here currently, having this conversation to bring awareness, and then after you and I have this talk, we discuss, hey, all right, now that I've said these complaints out loud, what can we do together to bring more awareness to the subject and start to make difference for the kids as is? Because for my platform, do I educate folks a lot on mental health? Yeah, but mental health, it spills in everything. It spills in the community, education. It's not just for adults. I have the mindset that mental health, as soon as you're born, and you have awareness of any kind, mental health is in the room. Mm-hmm. So the people who facilitate the things that I don't do and touch, I want to hear their opinion. Because, I could choose not to give a fuck. I love giving a fuck, though. And these people are my friends and associates. So getting the chance to sit down and hear the stories in person, that helps me keep in mind, there's so much more to do.
Yeah.
How do I do it correctly? Because I'm not here to be Robin Hood. I'm here to hear the actual problem and understand, okay, where do I belong in this discussion, or do I belong in the discussion? or hopefully the right person comes across this talk and says, there's something I can do for those people.
Yeah.
So, in your family's rich history and who you've been, how do you bring yourself to the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes back to representation. Mm-hmm. I think even the data tells us that there are not a lot of Black and brown leaders in education, which is a very big issue. Like, I remember even in my own educational experience, my first time having a Black teacher was in middle school.
Do you remember what grade?
It was 7th grade.
What was that like for you?
It was an interesting experience. I mean, I think it's something that I had longed for a very long time and didn't, realize the impact of it until years later. But like, that was empowering to see a man that looked just like me standing in front of a class of students, like educating us in a very confident, positive way. Like, and I think, and he was good. The brother was a good teacher. He taught me math. I think it was math, and he loved what he did. It wasn't just something that he came to work to do. Like, you could tell he loved what he did, and he enjoyed, sharing that with his students. And I thought that was powerful, because before then I just thought that, I'm gonna walk in my class and the person I'm gonna see is probably someone of a different race. And not that there are people that don't look like me that are not invested, that weren't invested, because they were. But I think there's something powerful about representation. And I think that's the biggest thing. Like, we need more Black and brown men and women in the classroom, in schools leading, because students need to see that. They need to see that, like, yes, I can become a professional football player. I can become a singer. I can become, a doctor, whatever the case may be. But I also can become this thing and that thing because my teacher told me that looks just like me, that I could do that, as well as my school leader. And I don't think we have that much representation in education. I think if we increase that, we have a bigger chance of students and kids being able to see that they can accomplish a lot at such a very young age.
How do you get over the hump of affordability? Because, you and I, we had our sit down, and it wasn't your fault that you weren't able to provide what would be needed for somebody like me to come into that educational space.
Yep.
How do you as educators work through that limit? Because there's only a limit. There should be a limit to how much you guys are able to do because you already have a job.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I think education through the public sector is only one way to make impact. And I think what we have to do is, like, yes, extend your reach as much as you possibly can from the public school sector. But like, if there's something that you're very passionate about, just like we teach the kids, like, create an opportunity or a space for that. I think it's the same thing for myself, like, and for people like me. Like, if you see something, if you see a need, create the need. And it doesn't have to necessarily be within the job that you currently have. It could be, on a Saturday, like, as simple as, I don't know. It could be as little as, like, going to one of your students' basketball games or football games, getting to know their families. Oh, okay, we have this in common. Okay, I can teach you something. You can teach me something. Like, just those very casual conversations can open up doors to many bigger things.
Do you guys get opportunities to do that?
I mean, you have to make them.
I mean, yeah, but like your personal time versus like on the clock time. That's what I ask.
It's hard to make time for it. But I think sometimes we get caught up in numbers and like, oh my gosh, I serve, for my case, 500 and something odd kids. Like, I got to make an impact for every one of these kids. And like, the reality is you're not doing the work by yourself. So like, if you take 2 or 3 kids, somebody else can take another 2 or 3 kids. And if you got a staff of like 40 and 50 odd people, like, you can impact the whole school. And so I think it's really about impact. I mean, I think it's really about mindset and like getting people to recognize that, like, if you just take a little bit of your personal time, it's your choice, but if you just take a little bit of your personal time to like reach out to a family or families, to provide access in some type of way or provide an experience in some type of way for, you know, your kids, then you're making a change. But I think on a wider scale, like if you have an interest or you think there's a need in the community, don't wait to do it within the role that you're currently in. Create it for yourself and like connect with people who are doing that same work or have the same desire, and make it happen. And like, I think sometimes we think we have to have all the answers, and that's why you work with people. That's why you build those relationships, like you and me. Like, I don't know what it means to like create mental health opportunities in school settings, like an expert from an expert's perspective, but I know you do. And so it's really like, how do we make those connections and bridge those gaps, and kind of build on like the expertise that people have in order to make something real for a community in need.
Yeah. Do you think your establishment would benefit from somebody like me coming up with mental health guidelines? Or just schools in general? Yeah,
I think education and, you know, in general is looking for something new. I think the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement, like I think those things are just microcosms of much bigger things that have happened over the last couple of years, where if you got any good sense, like, you know, there's a need to do education different. And so, yes, I think there is a need. I think people have a desire for that work. It's really about creating a plan that speaks to that, from an educational setting.
Okay. What would you say speaks to the heart of the kids from what you've come to observe? Because a couple of times, I think your emphasis in this conversation has been, are we listening to the kids? Tell me how important that is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really big part of the work, and that changes. And I think what kids need today, what we needed as kids, is very different from what the kids need today and what kids will need for years to come.
Tell me more.
But I think at the root of that is this. Like, I think at the end of the day, kids want to feel a sense of belonging, and they want to feel loved.
Yeah.
I think that's something that needs to be tapped into more. For some of our kids, you know, making good grades and being successful academically speaks to them.
Yeah.
But for some of our kids, that doesn't, because that's just never been a priority.
Can you give me an example of that? Where like it may not work for one, but for the other, it's what's needed.
Yeah. So, you know, we currently have students that are in what we call an accelerated pathway. So these are students who, based on their data, have an opportunity to excel academically. And so we provide them with classes that accelerate their learning. And they love that. Like, it speaks to them. Like, them taking the test and scoring really high on the test is like,
they don't get bored.
Right? So they're yearning for those experiences. One, because education has come very natural for them over the years, or they come from a household where, you know, that has been pushed, and they see examples of how having an education and being successful academically can provide you access. But then, and it's easy to propel them forward.
Yeah.
But then you have, you know, students who are very intelligent. Like, I don't think the issue is being intelligent. Like, they have the skill set, they have the ability to be successful, but they haven't had as many opportunities to exercise that, whether it's because of biases that people have had about them over the years, or if it's because of, you know, environmental factors that have impeded their ability to like tap into those things. And so they take a little bit more work in terms of getting them to understand the importance of academics. So they're not going to initially respond to, oh, you have an F in my class, you got to bring this up to an A in order to pass, or in order to, you know, progress and be successful in a school setting. They're going to respond more to some of the intangible things, some of the intrinsic things, like, yo, does this teacher actually know who I am? Do they know my name, right? Do they know my name? Do they know my family, where I come from? Do they know my experience? Like, do they know what I come to school thinking about on a daily basis? Like, what do they know about me, and how are they responding to me as a person? And through that, do I feel loved? Do I feel a sense of belonging to that teacher, or to that school or community? Like, do I feel like I'm a part? Do I feel like I'm heard? Am I seen? And I think those are things that it's easy to overlook if you're just focusing on the academics.
When it comes to teachers, are teachers implementing different forms of, hey, this is me showing you love and talking students through that? Or is there time and space for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, social emotional intelligence has become a very big piece of the educational space. And I think we have been very intentional, where I currently am, around creating those spaces where you can build community with your students, with families, without it impeding, you know, the learning process. And just understanding from, you know, an adaptive perspective, like, you can't have one without the other. And so, and I think we have thought of doing anything outside of academics in a very formal way. Like, social emotional intelligence does not have to be formal all the time, right? Yeah. Like, it's not a formal thing. Like,
it's not supposed to be.
Yeah. If you can have a conversation with a kid, just a smile for a kid, a hug, asking them how their weekend was.
Teachers are allowed to hug the kids?
Yeah. I mean, I think, of course, like, we have to follow, you know, CDC guidance around social distancing and everything. But like, yeah, I mean, there are ways to engage your kids in such a way where you can have those informal conversations to let kids know that they feel loved, or that they are loved.
Have you ever thought of implementing teaching a class where kids get to choose what their appreciation language would be? Because love language and appreciation language are the same thing.
Yeah.
But it's just the words. And I think teaching that class may give kids an opportunity to learn, oh, I do like that.
Yeah.
And learn to not just choose, but recognize, oh, this is something I'm into and I didn't realize that.
Oh, yeah. I think there's a space where that can definitely take place. The reality is this.
I just need ideas, Mike. I'll take it with you.
No, you're a mess. I think the reality is, like, as human beings, we innately experience things. We feel things. And I think I was listening to a podcast between Oprah Winfrey and an author by the name of Bryn. I think her name is Bryn Brown. And she has a new book by the name of, I don't remember the name of the book, but essentially it talks about how humans, we experience all of these emotions and all of these things, but we don't know how to express them, which limits our experience of life, right? And she talked about how she did a survey with people and they were only able to identify 3 feelings that are associated with life and the human experience. And that was being mad, sad, and happy. But there are so many more experiences in life than that. Yeah. And I say that to say, like, I think the start of social emotional intelligence is like building our vocabulary around feelings. What is this feeling that I'm feeling? Like, what is it that I'm feeling? And like, what word can help me articulate this feeling outside of like your basic happy, sad, or angry, and like teaching them how to express themselves and communicate that.
Do you want to, let's have a talk. How do you define emotional intelligence?
I think when I think of emotional intelligence, I think of the ability to understand what it is that you're feeling, and be able to articulate that in such a way where it has the ability to shift the space around you. And not just from a personal standpoint, but even like from an empathetic standpoint too. Like, how do you understand your feelings, but how do you understand the feelings of the people around you?
Yeah.
And what you can do to either, to build that in a positive way for yourself or for others.
Okay. I'll take it a step further for you.
Okay.
So, emotional intelligence is something that's meant to be selfish, and that's okay. When most people teach emotional intelligence, they teach it from the passive form. It's meant to help create peace, avoid conflict. You want to be able to let the person know how they've had you fucked up, right? And I actually had this talk with a friend on Twitter yesterday. Gave him the whole spiel. Emotional intelligence is the ability to identify what's making you happy, sad, angry, or any other emotion you may not have felt before, but you may need to go to a book to identify what that emotion is. That's what understanding is. Now, people don't need to respect your emotional intelligence or you approaching them about what they have done to you that was either wrong or right, because it's a two-way street. Emotional intelligence on too many occasions is only acknowledged when it has to do with something negative, and it could be something positive.
Very much so.
As men, and I don't know if you've ever ran into this, I had a hard time expressing my joy to others. So I could say stuff like, oh, fuck with that, nah, that's good, but like simply looking at one of your boys and like, hey man, that really made me happy, I appreciate that. That is something that as men, we haven't been taught to simply say that and leave it there. It has to come with a pause. And it's just like, nah, just say it. Let the other person have that. Bring people to your space. And when it comes to the art, because to me, art is something that's practiced. It's a craft, and that's what emotional intelligence is supposed to be. You should be able to reserve the right that if someone has done you wrong and you have tried or given effort into teaching them, hey, here's how you did me wrong. I just want to let you know, do you have an opinion on this? If the people you've approached about that space habitually line step, reserve the right to beat their ass also. Because that is communication. Too many times people say, well, words should be your form of communication. No, violence is communication. Violence happens because people are wronged and they're not respected. And when they try to complain out loud or let folks know what's happened, no one paid attention. That's when violence happens. And we may be spoiled in terms of America and having laws and those laws being enforced and protected. That we could dumb down things to conversations, but the act of violence is an action. That in itself is conversation. When you go to countries and people don't understand what you're saying, we all reserve the right of, okay, let's use our hands and words and pick up things for people to understand what's going on. And in certain cases, that's what violence is. And emotional intelligence belongs in that circle too. So, just keep that in mind. And I know teaching kids, you're not supposed to teach violence, but when kids fight or there's a disagreement, it's because either people aren't being understood or they're being understood and people are crossing lines.
Oh, very
and
true.
The same goes for teachers also.
Yeah, that is a very different perspective. I haven't heard it from that lens, but I think that that even taps into like how are we being preventative in terms of like helping people express themselves in such a way where it doesn't get to a point where they have to be violent or feel like that's the next step. Is I think is really important even now for kids. Is like getting them to like, how do we exercise, like, for lack of better words, like mindfulness is one example, but like, how do we exercise different strategies to be able to help share a story even when people aren't listening?
I mean, we as adults are examples of that. During the Black Lives Matter protests, when people weren't listening to us, property got destroyed. When property got destroyed and the big businesses was like, hey, they're destroying property, that's when laws started getting passed and more media coverage started happening, and other people on the other side, not just in our community when it came to Black, started questioning like, hey, wait, that was wrong.
Right.
The thing that they are angry about, they should be angry about.
Yeah.
And that's when relatability came. But
But
it's still in art form.
Exactly. And it shouldn't get to that. You know what I mean? Like,
but that's what history does, though.
Very true.
Yeah, and then sometimes it's not about it shouldn't get to that point. Sometimes it's, well, history is probably one of the biggest hills you're going to have to overcome.
Yeah.
As you grow. Especially when it comes to streaming, because due to streaming, they could edit history however they see fit.
Oh, for sure.
For videos like tapes and DVDs, that's history that can't be changed. But with streaming services, like, for example, when Kanye released that album, Father Stretch My Hands, that was the first time we saw that an artist has the ability to edit albums as they see fit. And they could re-release the album and you won't be aware. And companies like Apple can replace those albums, or you no longer have access to the original version.
Very true.
And I was like, oh, they could edit anything. They could reshoot scenes in a movie if they wanted to. And I was like, oh, it's over for us. We got to pay attention or it's done.
Yeah. No, that's real. That's very real. That's very real.
Yeah. I just wanted to push that. There's, not a lot of people are going to talk about that, but you have to understand my point of view. The streets raised me from working on U Street. Like, I always view myself as a child. So every year, what did I learn as a child? Working on U Street 10 years, head of security, the manager of the establishment, but I was the strongest person in the establishment.
Right.
So it makes sense that I'd be the head of security. So fights, conversations, and I've talked down more fights than I fought. But whenever fights happen, a lot of people will tell you when they fought me, they understood why the fight happened. And then I also left the door open if they wanted to ever talk to me. So you could fight me and we could talk. Like a real fight, like blood everywhere. Oh, there's teeth. All right, come back the next day. Juice, man, you really had me. I get it. We could chat. It doesn't always have to be, violence doesn't have to end with just the fist. There should be an opportunity if both parties see fit to exchange words. But people don't ever want to acknowledge that. And that's what war has done. And it's ironic talking about war because
case in point, right? Yeah,
but I mean that's the cause and effect.
Nah, that's real. That's real.
But yeah, just keep that in mind when it comes to your kids. Like when they fight, not just how the fight happened or what led to this. Did you both give each other a chance to listen before we got here? And do you guys know how to listen? Listen is something that's practiced. A lot of women I've dated over the last 15 years of my life have taught me that I am not a good listener. So every day I spend practicing how to listen. Yeah. And that's something that you have to practice with intention. Even if you don't like it, just practice. You'll get better one day.
That's real. That's definitely real. Listening is definitely important.
Yeah. So when it comes to the kids, how do you teach them how to listen? Just throwing bombs in there on you today.
Yeah, that's deep.
I feel like you're gonna have like assignments after this.
Yeah, I know, right?
And not just take commands, but listen for themselves.
I think you got to model that, right? Kids are sponges, so they take in everything that they see, whether they verbalize it or not. And so
or whether you're teaching it to them on purpose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So as adults, like, it's important for us to recognize, like, students and kids are watching every move that we're making, everything that we say, everything that we don't say. One thing that I love to live by is, like, everything that you do and say is a message sender. And so, like, you got to be very intentional around the message that you are sending to anybody, specifically kids, because during that adolescent stage of development, they're taking all of that in, and it's creating how they see the world around them. And so, like, what we do as adults makes a huge impact, specifically on that population. And so I think modeling what that looks like to listen is important, whether you're doing it with a colleague or a peer, and even with them. Like, I think listening for kids is like taking their actual experience and applying it to the learning that they're doing every day. Like, oh, this teacher put my name in this word problem, or my teacher connected this story that I'm reading in this book to something that I just experienced last week. Like, that lets kids know that, like, oh, they're actually listening to me. And they're
keeping me in mind.
And keeping me in mind. And I think the other piece, like, even when you think about conflict, like, I think as adults, we often, goes back to this formal piece thing, is like, there's this formality around education. And I think we have to break that barrier down and let students see and kids see that we are also human. And so saying, like, hey, like, yo, guys, I'm going to give you everything that I got today in terms of teaching you, but, like, I'm not in a good space right now, and this is why. I didn't get my coffee this morning, so, like, I'm a little on edge, but, you know, I'm gonna do what I need to do for you. And I think kids hearing that brings a sense of humility to the story, of humanity to the story. I'm sorry, and just helps them be able to recognize, like, oh, these people are real people. And so, like, I think that's important when we talk about this idea of, like, teaching them how to listen. Yeah. And giving them the structure. Like, I think there's a structure that you can create for students to help them learn how to listen. Like, listening is always not meant to respond. Like, listening just means to, like, take it in and keep it moving. And I think providing them that structure of how to listen, and listen to learn, and also listen to understand, you know, I think that's important too.
At any point, do you think adults will start making space for kids to understand what anxiety and depression is in the classroom and be taught that?
I don't know what that necessarily looks like
for now.
Right now.
Yeah.
I think what schools can start to do is, like, look at school communities from, like, within smaller communities, if that makes sense. And so for us, like, yes, we are a middle school. I serve a middle school, but within that middle school, we have grade levels. And so, like, creating communities within those grade levels, I think, is important, and supplying them with, like, providing, like, a counselor who can support students just on that grade level. Providing, you know, behavior support for that grade level. Providing an assistant principal for that grade level creates a community of support systems, and, like, preventative support systems, where, like, students know they can go here or here in order to get what they need, instead of having to compete with one person or group of people that serves the whole community. Like, you have specific people that you can go to, like, have those conversations and feel comfortable, like, being completely authentic in those spaces without feeling like you're just another number.
Yeah.
And I think that's a start to get to that point.
So, sort of chime in on things.
Okay.
Can you see DC implementing all teachers should take at least one counseling class coming in? Because teachers aren't meant to be counselors, but they're also not meant to be parents. But in our conversation, we realize the difference between a teacher and a parent is just the title. And it's a lot of responsibility on the establishment, but the kids can't implement what the adults can for now. They are here to learn from us. So, for example, I didn't choose to be an advocate. I was already a mental health advocate from my previous relationship starting in 2012, when she continuously taught me about what depression and anxiety look like, what it did to her dealing with that. And then when she passed away in 2018, I became an advocate from that experience. Yeah. But it didn't just stop with what she taught me. I reached out to other professionals. Yeah. In terms of counselors, I reached out to other professionals in terms of wellness folks. And then I started publicly implementing things from 2019 to present. Yeah. So the work always starts with us.
It does. And I think that's a very sensitive topic. Yeah. To tackle within a professional setting. And, like, even with your personal experience, like, there was something that happened that intrinsically motivated you to say, yep, I need to become an advocate for mental health because of a personal experience. And that's a decision you made as an individual. And I think for educators or just for people in general, depending on where they are in their walk, like, they're not ready to take that step.
Yeah.
And I think when you create a space where they're forced to do that, it takes the authenticity away from that work and actually making the change that needs to happen. Because, like, all, organizations and institutions are always implementing practices that they think are good for the general welfare of people. But, like, if people aren't invested in that practice, then it's not going to be good work.
Yeah.
Which is why you have evaluative systems to make sure that people are implementing something the way it's supposed to be implemented. So, like, I think there are ways in which you can say, like, hey, as a school district, as a school, like, this is what we're committed to doing from a mental health perspective. Yeah. But I think part of that is also, like, creating opportunities for people to, like, unpack the adaptive work behind why certain things are important. And so, like, you can do tactical things all day, but if there's not this adaptive, like, approach to the work and why you're doing this work, I don't think it's going to make the change that it needs to make.
Yeah.
In any institution.
Yeah. But even with that being said, the ability of having the tools versus not having the tools when you're faced with the moment.
Oh, yeah. I think.
And that's more what my work is. My work is, I'm giving you the just in case tool. Okay? Like, that's what this is. It's the just in case package. Hey, just in case this happens, here's the information. Yep. Because you as a vice principal, you've been asked a lot of questions. And I know a lot has been asked of you. And there has to be a certain point where you look at what's being asked or who's asking this, and you think to yourself, why is this now a question? Like, how do you handle those moments as an educator?
I think it goes back to what you're saying. It's like, you got to listen, right? And, like, the reality is this. People are going to tell you what they want you to hear.
Yes.
And so you have to be very keen to, like, what they're actually telling you and what they're not telling you.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are situations, and I don't know if I can give, like, a specific example, but I think, when people are asking for things or advocating on behalf of things, that means they think there's a need somewhere, or they think they've lost something that they feel like they need. And so it's just, I think it's important to just listen to figure out, like, what are they actually asking me? And what is it that they're not saying that they're also still asking me? And how can I provide this actual, whatever the ask is? So I think part of that is just, listening, processing, and recognizing what's actually within your locus of control in that very moment, and what's not. I think a lot of times we hear things and, we think to ourselves, oh my gosh, I got to do this, this, and that. But, like, some of this work, like, is not really in your locus of control. And, like, you're creating anxiety, you're creating, situations that, like, you don't have any power over. But, like, there are things that you can actually take from this conversation. Yeah. Or take from whatever is being asked and actually implement it on a very, like, effective scale, if that makes sense.
Do teachers know how to learn after becoming teachers?
Yeah, you just got to create the space for that to happen. I think it can happen. And if you want to be a good educator, an effective educator, then you've got to be a lifelong learner. And you have to recognize that, like, you don't know everything, right? There are always things to learn, and you're not the one person that can provide knowledge. Like, that comes from families, that comes from your peers, that comes from the students in which you serve. Like, I think one of the biggest myths is that you can't learn anything from kids because they're young. And so, like, I think if anybody that you want to listen to, you got to listen to the kids. Because, like, although they don't have as much experience, everything that they say, good or bad, is coming from a place of authenticity.
Yeah.
And they're very honest people.
I think one of the best life lessons I ever heard came from a kid. My friend Jasmine, she's actually the first interview for If You Build It that has to do with yoga. It's on the YouTube channel.
Okay.
Someone from wellness that I probably want to connect with you at some point in the future. She told me that she was talking to one of her friends, one of the kids that she takes care of, and she was like, you know, how are your friendships going? And he was like, you know, I don't think I have space for a friendship right now. Because he was like drawing a ship, and she was like, well, what's that? He's like, well, I'm drawing a boat. I have a friend boat. It's much smaller. I don't really have space for a friendship right now. But I think boats are fine. So right now it's me on a boat figuring things out. And when I heard that, I was like, man, he is far ahead of a lot of people.
Yes. That was a nice analogy.
How old is this kid?
Right.
I was like, oh man, we probably learned that lesson like 25.
Gotta be, right? Yeah. That's powerful.
No, it is. It is. It is. So, in your journey, what have you learned?
One of the first things that I've learned over time is that hard work beats talent. And that you don't have to be the best at everything. And that it's important that if you see something that you want to change or you want to improve, work towards that. But it may require you to work a little harder than the next person. But if you're committed to that, you will eventually get to a place where you feel confident in that particular space. So I think that's one of the number one things that I've learned. I have, also learned the importance of like friends and family. The world is cruel. The world is so cruel. And it's just important to have like a group of people who, no matter what, are unconditionally like committed to you and your success as a person. And that truly love you, despite whatever it is that you may think of yourself or may be going through. Like that is important. So you got to have that safety net of people. I think the other thing is those are two big things. I think the other thing that I've learned is that the importance of just finding a way or making one. I think it's so easy to like look at other people's walks or look at other people's journeys and say, oh, I want to do that because they did it and it looks and sounds cool. Like, and they've been successful, doing that. But I think, there comes a time and place where like, as generations, change, times change. And so like, as you move with the times, that means that you got to create something new. And so like always being on the nexus of something new and something innovative is important. And if it doesn't currently exist, like you have to create it. Like don't wait on people to create it for you. Like you got to create that space yourself. And it'll eventually make room for you. So I say those are the top three things. There's probably a couple there's probably more that I can say in terms of what I've learned over the years.
You don't gotta unload the whole clip,
Yeah, I know, right?
A couple is fine. Like,
and trust yourself. Like, I think one of the biggest things is like, as a Black man in the professional space and just in general, like, because of the narrative, the unjust narrative that has been created around Black men, I think it's easy to internalize this idea of second guessing yourself because everybody else is second guessing you because of who you are. And I think it's important to trust your instinct, trust what you believe in and what it is that you're doing, the work that you're doing, because there is somebody who is listening, who appreciates it, and who your story or what you're bringing to the table is like impacting their lives in a positive way. And you might not always hear that, but it's important to know that you're making an impact, and trust the work that you're doing and the path that you're on to continue in that impact, on a small scale or even, on a bigger scale.
Okay. So where can the people find you?
Where can they find me? So I do have Instagram. My Instagram is WD_86. Not so much of a professional page. It's like my personal life experience through a couple of pictures. Do you have a professional page?
I
don't. That's something I do have one. I'm sorry. I do have one. I just don't use it as much.
Okay. So it's under construction.
It's under construction.
Yeah. We can spin the block on that one then.
We can definitely spin the block on that.
You don't have to explain anything to anybody.
Yeah, but
it's a safe space.
Yes. So outside of that one, we're gonna work on that. But yeah, outside of the social media realm, I'm a Clark Atlanta grad, so depending on what time of the year it is, you can find me on campus. And outside of that, I'm in the city. I'm around the city. So hey, on a good night, you may see me hanging out. Just come and say what's up. I'm good people.
Okay. Well, this has been another episode of Mental Health Monday. See you guys next time. Peace.